Okay, good. Good.
The one thing I forgot to say. Hey everyone, Carmen here, digital editor at Ms. I am with Elizabeth McCracken. Today we're going to talk about her amazing novel, BOWLAWAY, which is out now.
Yes.
Yes, and also included in our most recent issue. We included it as one of our bookmarks. And thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, I'm so tickled to be here.
I am so excited. I love this book. I was admittedly the one who read it for bookmarks, and I always start off by sort of asking folks about the inception story of their project and their work, but I also feel like I should sort of supplement it by saying that the original reason I picked up the book was I was like, a book about women bowling? Like, I've just never encountered a book about women bowling. And I grew up bowling and sort of never told anyone. And then very recently made the decision to come out as having bowled and having been I'm like, I was in a mother-daughter league. I've thrown a few balls down the lane in my day. So it was really fun to find it. And then, I mean, once I opened it, I just got completely lost in it because the writing is just really beautiful and amazing. But it does sort of prompt the question of not just how the book came to be, but sort of how did bowling end up being at the center of this like force of feminist fiction that you put together?
Well, I have to ask you, where did you grow up bowling?
Oakland, New Jersey.
So, 10-pin.
Yes. I didn't even know about the tiny pins until duck pin?
Candle pin. There's also duck pin. Yeah, this book is about candle pin bowling, but I like all kinds of bowling. I bowled 10-pin when I was in my 20s, but
yay!
I grew up candle pin bowling because that's what you bowl in New England, which is where I grew up in Massachusetts. And New Englanders always refer to candle pin bowling, which nobody has heard of outside of New England, as real bowling. Very snobby about it. And the balls are about that big, and the pins are sort of straight up and down compared to 10 pins. And I live in Texas now, and I was missing home, missing New England. And Texans are they have a real identity about their state, which I had never felt Massachusetts, where I'm from, had. But I sort of thought about how nice it is to go, this is the very particular part of the country that I'm from, and I'm going to be proud of everything about it, and there's nothing more New Englandish than candlepin bowling. So that's how I started writing about it. But I also wanted to write particularly about women bowling, because the book began with my grandfather's genealogies. He was a professional genealogist and ran a magazine. And the thing about genealogies is that women often go missing between the cracks. They were the phrase that I always remember that is in his genealogy is probable wife of.
Oh my God.
And it is also true that my grandfather, whom I loved, was not so interested in the women. And so I wanted to write about women and families, both those who show up and those who don't show up.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. So, well, because one of my other questions was sort of, is this historical fiction? And so it is in so many ways. It's sort of historical fiction in terms of you coming home and your family and genealogy, but then also I feel like there's so many times in which I don't know that the year was ever written in the text, but I'd be like, I know what time frame this is based on sort of what is happening to the women in this public space, or, you know, a reference to suffrage that pops up and you're sort of like, now I can place where we are, what time this is. So that's really interesting. And were there what sort of aspects of your own history and sort of the history of your home really inspired you to take it in the direction it went?
I'm trying to remember how much of my own family history is in there, and not a lot except for names. I took the names out of my grandfather's genealogy. There may be some stories in there that I've forgotten. And I was purposely incredibly foggy about dates because my goal was to make it possible, but not probable. That's sort of the line that I've taken. And so there's one historic event, the Great Boston Molasses Flood, which is an actual historic event which happened on January 15th, 1919. and everything else is fuzzy. Though I haven't moved any events.
Okay, awesome. I did not realize that was the one true.
That's the one true event. And there's stuff about World War II, some of it which is from my grandmother, not my grandmother, my great aunt, Jessica Bernstein's memoirs that she wrote about being in Italy during the war. But it's not to a fixed date. I don't think it's quite possible there's not a single other fixed date. I didn't want anybody to do the math, partially because whenever I write a novel, I rely on the copy editor to say, this person was born this year, so they're 25 and not 37. It never occurs to me. And I was really happy to write a novel in which I didn't have to do that.
Yeah, you're like, no one has ages, no one has birthdays. Yeah.
It all works out. Like, if you
yes.
it's fine, but they're definitely sort of like periods of time and not this person was born on this date.
Yeah, well, and I love that the story sort of goes through generations and different, sort of communities and stories. And I also think it was such a perfect fit that it ended up being in this issue that we just released with the photos of all of the new women serving, all the feminists now serving in the House. And especially because we've seen this huge influx in suffrage books coming to our doors, because next year is the centennial celebration of women's suffrage. And I loved that suffragists were so explicitly included. That was the moment where I was like, I'm going to finish this entire book, was this idea of, women sort of fighting for the right to vote and then coming back and going bowling together and, finally being able to. Were women actually only allowed to bowl behind curtains? Yeah,
there were steel curtains that women bowled behind.
Oh my God.
And it was advertised as a sport for women as well. So that the fact that women were even allowed in bowling alleys was kind of amazing. But because you had to protect their modesty, in most bowling alleys there was a steel curtain that went down.
Oh my God.
And women were allowed, at least in some bowling alleys, only at certain times.
Yeah, and I mean, that was, that sort of Bertha, the main character of Bertha's like first revolutionary act is really to say women can bowl here without the curtain and whenever they want. And I was wondering, so is Bertha based on a real woman in your family? Like, sort of, where did the inspiration for all of the very distinct, like, there's so many distinct women characters in the book, and I'm wondering sort of where they came from too.
A huge number of them simply came because the names from my grandfather's genealogies were so evocative. So Bertha Truitt was a name. Luetta Mood was a name from there. A character named Betty Gran, whose name is Cracker Gran, was it there. And it's just, they were too good not to use. But they also somehow, I'd never done that before, to build characters sort of from the name up. And I'm not sure where Bertha herself came from, except that I have a great fondness for eccentrics altogether. And when I was a kid, I liked reading anthologies about great American eccentrics, and I wanted to write one.
Yeah, and well, sort of speaking of Bertha and of suffrage, there's been this thought about Bertha that's been like haunting me as I was thinking about what I wanted to talk to you about. And I went, I guess it was last year, to like a presentation about women's suffrage and Alice Paul and non-binary. In a lot of ways, Alice Paul's work and the work of suffragists has been sort of erased from our great man version of nonviolent resistance in the U.S., right? This idea that suddenly in the 60s, a bunch of men in the U.S. started practicing nonviolent resistance when, women had done it in the 20s and obviously many before.
Right.
And the woman who was giving the presentation said this complete sort of tangential side thought that just never left me. That was that, that women like Alice Paul, they're remarkable, but so many women are remarkable, they just don't have the ability to reach their full potential. And then she was sort of like, but the tragedy is really that none of us will ever know our true potential in the world that we live in right now. And I feel like it's very interesting that so many of the characters in the book sort of get empowered by Bertha, by their relationships with her, by having her in their lives as an advocate, by sort of her pushing them into uncomfortable spaces and places. But Bertha herself seems so imbued with this idea that she just belongs where she is and she's allowed to take up space. And I can't get over the fact that maybe it's because she doesn't really have an origin story, right? She has no baggage. She has no past. She appears in this graveyard and comes to consciousness, and then it's like, I'm going to buy this bowling alley and open it up and change everyone's lives for the next couple years. And I'm just wondering, having written her, so knowing her better than all of us do, what do you think we can all sort of do to bring Bertha Truitt back? How can we come home to Bertha?
I mean, I certainly think, because I have some idea where she came from, and I wrote lots of pages of her background, but it was never right. But I really love the idea of going, no, this is who I am now. And from here on out, this is who I am. And I'm incredibly fond of her as a character, because I think it's right that because she is that way, she allows people around her to also be that way. Not only just because they can see that she's doing it, because she doesn't care. And I do think not caring can be really handy, or not worrying about how you might obscurely trod on somebody's concept of who you should be.
Yeah.
And not to try to figure out when you arrive in every place sort of where you are in the hierarchy or what people expect you to do. I'm always aware as a woman that I sometimes have to put aside my good manners if I want to get something done, because my impulse is to always be polite. And I do think that it's true of Bertha, is that there's nothing sort of polite about her. I think she's good.
Yeah.
I don't think she's rude, but that, she only cares about her own rules for society and not other people's. And so she doesn't waste time worrying about the expectations of her.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like you said, it's fun to watch her do it as you're reading the book, because there are no massive, earthquake level negative ramifications for her just simply being like this. Well, I just want it to be this way. Because I feel like that as women, we're always so afraid that, if we step outside of these lines that we've drawn for ourselves or other people have drawn for us, that, oh my God, everyone will be mad, or, this will happen, that will happen. And really sort of what happens to Bertha is she just gets to live the life she's trying to live on her own terms. And so I loved that about her as a character. And I mean, I feel like I related to her also because I'm an eccentric. So I was like, yeah, I could see myself in this totally body woman who is just like living her truths, and being eccentric and kind of weird.
Well, and the funny thing is that you think, oh, people are going to be mad. And the fact is, sometimes they aren't. And sometimes they are. And you can't actually predict in which situation you'll get which reaction. So it does seem like a waste of time to worry about it.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of the stuff she's doing too, and I feel like what I love about this intergenerational narrative that happens in the book is that you sort of get to see this maybe tiny gesture that turns into a culture shift, right? Like she says that women are allowed in the bowling alley at all hours, which then somehow makes a bunch of the men in town rethink their notions of masculinity and gender. And suddenly there's, a woman bowling with her child, and suddenly it just sort of is like these tiny little doors that she opens, and you get to really see the impact that one life can have, and the impact that sort of one woman can have on her community and on the culture. And sort of what were you hoping the impact would be for readers when they read the book?
Oh, golly, I don't know. I have to say, as a fiction writer, I try not to think about that, because if I do, the entire souffle will fall. Like if I worry about, I can only create it from the inside out, I think. And it's incredibly, just listening to you talk about the book is both gratifying and sort of the oddness of like looking at a mirror image of yourself. Like, oh, is that what that book is about? I mean, it's great.
Well, and what was the impact that it had what was the impact of writing this really, I would say, very feminist fiction book have on you? Like, was there a reverberation on you as the writer?
I think the reverberation has been afterwards in talking to people about it, because it's not that I set out to write a feminist novel, though I am a feminist to my bones and come from generations of feminists. So it's been wonderful to hear people refer to it that way. I'm like, oh, good, because I think that if I tried to sort of self-consciously write a feminist book, then it would be didactic. But it's something I believe in deeply, and I also have a 10-year-old daughter whose obsession is reading books with strong women characters, or brave girls, as she says. And a good
obsession, I think.
It's an excellent obsession. And she's very serious about it.
What a great hobby for a 10-year-old girl. Yeah.
And it's very aware that those are books that exist in the world, but you have to go out and seek them. And that she knows that they create a certain pleasurable feeling in her reading about girls and women who can do anything. And I wouldn't have thought that I was writing a book like that for her until I was done with it, and I realized, oh yeah, no, I was subconsciously always informed by the fact that we need books with strong women characters.
Yeah. Oh my God, and that's really sweet. Did she read it? Has she read it?
No, she's 10.
It's on her list.
Yeah. I'll slip her a copy.
Yeah, it'll take her a little while to get to it. Well, and I also, because I think it was a really engaging world and it felt so familiar. I mean, it's obviously taking place here, except it feels very surreal too, very dreamlike to read the book. And it was just such a well-constructed universe that you could really lose yourself in. And I've always been more of a nonfiction person who has leaned more towards like memoir and sort of historic books about feminist stuff. And it was really interesting to me just how, like, not only did I just sort of cherish and devour this book, but then I started just like grabbing all these fiction books out of the book closet and reading all of this fiction to try to seek out these fictional characters and sort of learn from them, these like strong women characters that we are blessed to receive every day with galley copies. And my friends were really surprised. They were sort of like, why are you suddenly so into fiction? Is it because the world has become so deeply unbearable recently that and I was like, maybe this is just such a great form of escapism to read a book that is presumably somehow connected to whatever this is, but also is this like alternative version where maybe things are going to be different. And I'm sort of curious what you think, as we embark on the end of Bertha's intergenerational tale finally being put out into the world and this centennial coming up, I just feel like there's all this conversation about what happens now. Like we're, embarking on this new century. What stories do you hope we get to tell in the real world for women in the next couple of years? I
mean, I definitely feel, for me, that fiction is like a pinhole camera, so that you can look at the total eclipse of the sun without,
I love that. Yes.
Without damaging your eyes. And goodness knows there's a lot of things that are hard to look at them, but it's hard to look directly at them. I'm trying to think of how to intelligently answer your very intelligent question about what kind of stories, and I think just more and various, because of the fact that so many lives of women are either didn't come to their full potential or did and have been lost to history because they seemed not to be the stuff that history was made of. Yeah. So yeah, as many stories of women as possible, really. I think that's a good gauge, a good goal. Yeah, I love it.
Well, I'm like, those were all the questions I had for you. I'm like, I cherish this book. It's so wonderful. And I urge everyone to go out, buy it, read it, share it, give it to everyone. I sent a bunch of copies to people.
Carmen, thank you.
Oh my God, it's just, I really loved it. Yeah, it was a tonic. It was a tonic for the times. It was sort of this reminder that, you know, there is history, that there is future too. I think this idea of Bertha in the book is gone sort of so early on. And I remember missing her, being like, no, wait, what? And then being able to really see, you know, there are so many endings that turn into beginnings and then there are all these sort of twists too, where you're worried that maybe, oh no, now something bad's going to happen and no one's going to be there to save the day, but someone is always there. So I think that was the ultimate comfort too, was seeing my four mothers in the book and then being able to say, well, that's because, you know, that's where I am now in the story. So now I have to just see what comes after the next page. But yeah, thank you so much. It's such an amazing book. And
thank you very much.
I'm so glad you could come here today and talk to us.
It's great to be here.
Thank you. And yeah, I will see you all soon. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks, Carmen.